Then you start analyzing them. Let's see, number 3. No, that one would take too long. I haven't got that much time. Okay, number 2, not sure. Okay, let's look at number 1. Maybe this is my best one, the one I thought of first. Now, if that won't work, here's number 2. What could I read? Maybe there's a book on my problem. Somebody spent a lifetime trying to figure out this problem. Maybe it's written out in concise language somewhere to give you the instant benefit of someone's advice. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Do your homework and find the solution. And then you start developing some working papers on what you're reading. Book number 1, this guy's crazy. Book number 2, this guy's too shallow. Book number 3, this guy's got some interesting things to say about this problem. I'm telling you, if you want to solve a problem, the best questions to ask are, number 1, what could I do? And number 2, what could I read? Don't miss the book that could help. So I'm asking you, don't sell yourself short here. You can find some answers. Now first, try to find them yourself from your own experience. Then second, if you can't find them yourself, now ask, what could I read? Go to the library. Go to the bookstore. Search your own library. Go back through your own journals to find the stuff that's been helpful and valuable to you. And see if maybe you've made some notes that could be helpful in your situation. Now, if that doesn't work, then ask question number 3. And question number 3 is, who could I ask? Now, guess what you're prepared with when you ask somebody to help you? You've got your working papers to show them. You say, I've got my working papers. I've tried my best to figure it out myself, and that finally left me short. Here are some of the books I've read. I've researched this material, and I'm still short. Now could I possibly ask you, and could you possibly help me? You can't believe how willing somebody will be to help you if, first of all, they've gotten the idea that you were willing to help yourself. So if you've got a problem, pull it out of your head and put it down on paper. Then ask yourself, what can I do? And if that doesn't work, ask yourself, what can I read? And if after researching all you can, you still can't come up with the answer, ask yourself, who can I find to help me? I promise you, if you try these ideas and ask these questions, when you've got a problem, you'll be able to solve about anything that gets in your way. The second step to keeping yourself on the right track and being self-enterprising is to develop the ability to brainstorm. Develop the ability to brainstorm. We hear this term all the time, but what is brainstorming? Just what it sounds like, letting your brain go. Being free from all the inhibitions and objections and negatives. Just putting an idea into your brain and letting it take off. Free associating. Not planning a train of thought, but thinking freely. Now, if you're planning a creative strategy session with your associates, a brainstorming session, let me give you a little hint. Effective brainstorming can only happen if you're free from your ego. You can't be worried about saying something stupid or silly or something totally off the wall, because your silly thought may trigger someone else's brain to take it one step further. Brainstorming in a group is an experience of collective thought, an experience of developing one idea or several ideas through a variety of thought processes. Here's another hint on brainstorming. It can't be effective unless everyone involved is comfortable with each other. If you don't feel comfortable within the group, you may withhold the very thought that provides the solution to the problem. You may withhold it because you don't want to appear stupid. How do you think all the advertisements you see on TV and in the magazines get created? How do you think some of those crazy campaigns are born? The process happens through hours and hours of creative brainstorming and working papers. Every member of the team jots down notes, and one idea builds on another idea, and another, and pretty soon a campaign is born out of the collective thoughts of the group. Now, I don't believe that the best decisions are made by committee, but great ideas are often created by committee. That's number 2 to keeping on the track of self-enterprise. Finding answers through brainstorming, whether you're letting your brain go by itself or whether you're part of a group. Brainstorming can often lead you to solutions. Solutions you'd never have thought of if you'd imposed parameters on your thought process. Here's number 3 for creatively keeping on the track of self-enterprise. And it's really an extension of number 2. Number 3 says, imagine outlandish solutions. Get your brain out of the ruts by considering ideas without considering their practicality. Consider ideas without considering how practical they are. You see, if you allow yourself to think without confinement, you may come across a solution that seems totally inappropriate. But guess what else this type of thinking will do? It'll allow you to open up the process, which will eventually lead to totally appropriate solutions. The 4th creative technique for keeping yourself on the right track to self-enterprise is through flowcharts and doodles and formulas. That's right, doodling. The thing you got in trouble for in grade school is actually quite stimulating to the brain, because the way you think while doodling is quite different than the way you think while creating a flowchart or writing a formula. Your doodles may end up looking like some symbol that will trigger your brain to think of an alternative solution. Drawing creative doodles wakes up a different part of your brain. Try creating a flowchart showing the path to success. What does it look like? Is it a straight course? Is it a varied course? Does it have a lot of curves and corners and different angles? Try creating a flowchart to success. It doesn't matter if it ends up being accurate or not. What matters is that it's stimulating the creative thought process. And once you awaken that creative part of you, you'll be amazed at the opportunities that were always there, ones you never saw before. It's all a matter of how you look at life and opportunities. The 5th method of creatively staying on the self-enterprising track is to access the information highway. It's amazing the kind of information that comes across the phone lines these days. With your computer, either your home computer or the one you've got at work, you can go online with hundreds of services. You can access stock quotes. You can access worldwide newspapers. You can do research. You can call up a bulletin board and directly ask questions of other users. You can make new contacts, develop an entirely new network. By taking advantage of the electronic age, you can learn more than you could otherwise learn, meet people that you'd otherwise never meet. You can find information that your library may not have. You can share information and transfer files that you've never before been able to share. Many people are afraid of their computers. They don't take advantage of all their system has to offer. Work with your computer. Find out what types of information and services you can access. Use it as a new resource, a new specialized resource that's yours for the taking. The 6th technique for staying on track: commit yourself to learning. Feed your mind. Sharpen your interest in 2 major subjects, life and people. Learn how you can better interact with others. Learn more on how to get the most from life. Learn all that you can so that you can become all that you can become. Learning is the beginning of a life worth living. Learning is the beginning of wealth. Learning is the beginning of happiness. Learning is the beginning of health. Learning is the beginning of spirituality and faith. Learning and searching is where the process of creating your own personal miracle begins. Learning is the beginning of self-enterprise. So there you have the 6 steps in creatively building your self-enterprise traits and ultimately building your ambition. Number 1, think on paper. Number 2, develop the ability to brainstorm. Number 3, imagine outlandish solutions to your challenges. Number 4, Try to think in a different way using doodles, flowcharts, and formulas to spur your thought processes. Number 5, access your computer's capabilities to reach the information highway. And number 6, commit yourself to learning all that you can learn in an effort to become all you can become. Those are the 6 steps to creatively developing your self-enterprise. Now here are some tips on the second component of self-enterprise. Courage. Ambition requires courage. Ambition requires that you stand up for what's right and fight what's wrong. Ambition requires that you hold on to your values in pursuit of your success. Ambition requires that you fight off fear. Fear is one of those things, one of those emotions that can stop people dead in their tracks, foregoing success and achievement. Fear can stop people from taking all that life has to offer them. Fear can rear its ugly head in many ways. Remember the old saying, "You have nothing to fear but fear itself." You can be afraid of success. You can be afraid of failure. You can be afraid of looking ridiculous. You can be afraid of change, either positive or negative change. You can be afraid of the competition. You can be afraid of loss and destruction. We're not always born with courage. We're not always born with all the fears either. You ever hear of a baby that's afraid of the dark? Of course not. They grew in the dark for 9 months. They should be afraid of the light. But do you ever hear of a 3 or 4-year-old afraid of the dark? All the time. Where'd they learn that fear? Who taught them that the dark outside is any different than the dark inside? Where'd they learn that? Well, probably from their parents who decided they needed a night light on. The kids probably think that they should be afraid of the dark if their parents insist that a light be kept on. And what about other fears in life? Are they learned? Well, maybe. Maybe some of your fears are brought on by your own experiences, by what someone has told you, by what you've read in the papers. Now, some fears are valid, like walking alone in a bad part of town at 2 in the morning. If there isn't fear, there's probably a bit of ignorance. And that type of ignorance can easily be solved by either education or experience. Once you learn to avoid that situation, you won't need to live in fear of it. Fears, even the most basic ones, can totally destroy our ambitions. Fear can destroy fortunes. Fear can destroy relationships. Fear, if left unchecked, can destroy our lives. Fear is an enemy. And let me tell you about some of the other enemies we face, enemies on the inside. One of the enemies that you've got to destroy before it destroys you is indifference. What a tragic disease this is. Ho-hum, let it slide. Drifting away from your ambitions. Here's one problem with drifting. You can't drift your way to the top of the mountain. Next one, an enemy inside all of us, indecision. Indecision is called the thief of opportunity, the thief of self-enterprise. It'll steal your chances for a better future. Take sword to this enemy, indecision. Next enemy on the inside is doubt. Sure, there's room for healthy skepticism. You can't believe everything, but you can't let doubt take over. Doubt the past and doubt the future and doubt each other and doubt the government and doubt the possibilities and doubt the opportunities and doubt yourself. I'm telling you, it'll destroy your life and destroy your chances and empty your bank account and empty your heart. Doubt is an enemy. Go after it. Get rid of it. Next is worry. We've all got to worry some, but don't let it conquer you. Let it alarm you. We've all got to be alarmed, but we don't want to be conquered. Worry is useful. 3 o'clock in the morning, your daughter's not home yet. You've got to worry. Step off the curb and one of those zealot taxis is coming. You've got to worry. But you can't let worry loose like a mad dog that drives you into a small corner. Here's what you've got to do with your worries. Drive them into a small corner. Whatever's out to get you, you've got to get it. Whatever's pushing on you, you've got to push back. Guess where illness is in your life? Illness is constantly testing the outer edges of your health plan, looking for a weak spot. And if illness can find a weak spot, it'll muscle in and take the territory, unless you've got enough discipline and power to say, I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to fight illness like an enemy. I'll work on my health plan enough to destroy it. The next enemy inside is overcaution, the timid approach to life. Timidity is not a virtue. It's an illness. And if you let it go and go and go, it'll conquer you, leave you without a promotion. Timid people don't get promoted. They don't advance and grow and become powerful in the marketplace. And it's possible to conquer it. Do battle with the enemy. Do battle with your fears. Do battle. Build your courage to fight what's holding you back, keeping you from your ambition. Do battle. Have the courage to fight back. Be courageous in your life and in your pursuit of what you want and who you want to become. Here are a few techniques to help build your courage. Number one, put all remote possibilities out of your mind. Don't worry about things you have no control over. Don't spend your time thinking about all the bad things that might happen to you. Don't spend your time plotting and planning ways to make sure these things will never happen to you. Courageous people don't worry about the unlikely, things out of their control. They concentrate on what they can control. Number two, face your fears before you start something. Imagine difficult situations before they occur. Make a list of the worst that could happen, and you'll probably see that it's not so bad after all. A friend of mine lost everything a few years back: home, cars, possessions, antiques, art, jewelry, credit, lost it all. So now, on her way back up, whenever she's faced with a tough decision, she asks herself, what's the worst that can happen? And guess what? She's already been through the worst and survived, so it's not an issue anymore. Now, you don't have to lose everything to lose that particular fear, but what I'm saying is, once you face your fear, you can move on. Once you've itemized out the worst that could possibly happen, you'll see that you have the inner strength to deal with it. And if you've looked at the possibilities beforehand, you'll probably never be faced with the situation at all. Why? Because you've already thought about it. You've already thought it through. And by contemplating what might happen, you'll chart your course to make sure that it doesn't. So the first courage-building technique is to put the remote possibilities out of your mind. The second, to face fears beforehand. And the third technique to build your courage is to imagine the alternative. See in your mind the end result of giving in to your fear. Really feel the cost of being ruled by fear. Then really feel the gain of following your ambition courageously. Weigh the two. See the difference. If you've been invited to address your national sales convention and are scared to death of public speaking, what should you do? Well, you could decline the invitation, knowing full well that your fears are holding you back, or you could take some classes, read some books, practice in front of a video camera, and see yourself stepping up to a whole new league, gaining more notoriety in your field, increasing your opportunities for future success. Once again, it's your choice. Be fueled by your fears or face your fears. It all depends on how you can live with yourself, always afraid of taking the next step. When you plot out your course for success, you know that there'll be some touchy moments when fear may get the best of you. But remember, if you use your visual chain thinking, if you can see your future ahead of you, if you really want what you're going after in pursuit of what you'll become, if you really have ambition, then you know that true success comes from taking the enterprising route.
Subscribe to youtube.com/BB Media for more great videos. Thank you.
As we're talking about the principles of building your ambition, let me give you the fifth one: working with others. The fifth principle for building your ambition revolves around working with others. Now, why do you think that your ability to work with others has an effect on building your ambition? This may sound a bit like a paradox, a contradiction, especially since we've stressed self-reliance and taking personal responsibility for all you do. But a successful life does involve other people: family, associates, kids, parents, employees, friends. Working with others, or living with others, or spending time with others means that you must also take responsibility for your relationships. Take bosses, for instance. How many bosses do you know that'd be totally lost without their secretary? Quite a few. They're a team. One takes the spotlight. The other is invaluable behind the scenes. One's a great idea person. The other a great detail person. They work together, or it wouldn't work at all. Of course, you need to be responsible for yourself and to yourself before you can be responsible to another person. You need to be the best you can be so that you can bring your absolute best to any relationship. And that's the tie-in to building your ambition, building yourself so you can build mutually beneficial relationships. It's like we said before, you can't be successful by yourself. And with that in mind, let's talk about a few ways to build relationships. Most of these tips are for building business relationships, building contacts, building good working relationships with colleagues, with vendors, with prospects, with future clients and present clients and past clients, building relationships. But remember, we are all people, regardless of our profession, and many of these tips work well for building other relationships too. Let's start with kindness. How kind should you be? As kind as you possibly can. Who should you be kind to? To everyone you come in contact with, from taxi drivers to hotel clerks to waitresses to store clerks, to people on the street and people in your office and people at home. Be kind to everyone. And here's why. A kind word goes a long way. Somebody's having a bad day and you don't know they're having a bad day. But somebody's really feeling bad and you offer up a kind word. Maybe it's just a friendly, "Hello, how are you?" Maybe it's just taking a minute or two to listen to what somebody has to say. But your few words of kindness or your few minutes of attention could turn somebody's day around, might make them feel more worthwhile, cared for. Be generous with your kindness. It'll go a long way. People will remember, whether you know them or not. If you're in a crowded restaurant and you're especially nice to the waiter, guess what? He'll remember you next time you come in. And then guess what'll happen? You'll get even better service. When you give kindness, it's not gone. It's invested. It'll come back to you 2, 5, 10, 100 times. Kindness, it's so important in every aspect of your life. It's so important in building good relationships with others. Now, here's what else is important. Sensitivity. Being touched by the experiences of others. Being sensitive to others. Understanding the plight of others. Opening up your heart and your mind and your attention to address the needs of others. The people you work with, the people you live with. Putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Seeing, if you can, what's going on in their heart. If there's a problem, you've got to be sensitive enough to ask some questions. Not one question, but many questions. Sometimes you won't even get through to the root of the problem until you've gotten 2 or 3 questions deep. Most people won't reveal the problem on the first question. You say, "Mary, how are you today? How are things?" And she says, "Well, everything's okay." And you can tell by the way she said it that everything's not okay. And most of us don't want to come right out and say what the real problem is unless 2 criteria are met. Number 1, we're talking to someone we can trust. And number 2, we're talking to someone who really cares. So sometimes it takes that second question, maybe a third, and maybe a fourth, before trust builds. And the person finally understands that you do care. Then they're willing to tell you what's really going on, what's really on their mind. Gosh, that saves so much time asking questions up front. Did you ever talk for an hour and then ask a question, found out that you just wasted the previous hour? Learn to ask questions that will build the trust and communication between you and those you work with. Learn to express, not impress. If you want to touch somebody, express sincerity from the heart. Impress builds a gulf. Express builds a bridge. Identification. You want to be able to relate your thoughts and philosophies and experiences to someone who'll say, "Me too. I know what you mean." You don't want their reaction to be, "So what?" If you're meeting someone for the first time, you're simply getting acquainted, making contact. Here's where you start. Find something you have in common. Find something you can both identify with. Start with where they are before you try taking them where you want them to go. So if you're trying to talk to somebody who's been stricken in the heart, and you've had this experience, you can talk about being stricken in the heart. And it'll mean something. It'll have substance. It'll have depth. And if you start there and then start building the bridge, you have identification. Then you start building rapport. And when you start building a rapport with someone, or when you want to enhance the rapport you have with someone, you need effective communication skills. You'll need the skills that'll help you work better with others to achieve their goals and achieve your goals. You need effective communication skills. Let me give you a few tips on good communication, because to be able to get along well with others, to be able to work well with others, to be able to live well with others, you must be a good communicator. Number 1, have something worth saying. Interest, fascination, sensitivity, and knowledge. Number 2, now that you've got something worth saying, number 2 is say it well. And you've got to be able to translate it so it'll benefit someone. You must have a good delivery system for your substance and knowledge and awareness and understanding and experience. Learn to say it well. And here are some clues on saying it well. Number 1, sincerity. The best communication occurs when both people are sincere, one sincerely wishing to learn or listen, and the other sincerely wishing to share. Number 2 in saying it well is repetition. Part of saying it well is simply practicing to say it well. Practice, practice, practice. Part of what I teach in sales training is practice. Practice. You start with something simple, and when you don't know much about what you're doing, practice is even more important. Let's say you're in sales and your presentation's not that good, and you wander around saying, "You wouldn't want to buy this, would you?" I'm telling you, maybe if you say that often enough during the day, somebody might say, "Well, maybe I would. What are you selling?" Now you can't say, "Mind your own business." No, once you've opened the door, you've got to go through it. Here's what happens if you practice in sales. You're bound to make sales. Somebody will say, "What are you selling?" and you've got to tell them. Maybe they'll want it. You're bound to get better. If you practice, you'll get better. You'll get better at your sales presentation. You'll get better at listening to your prospect. You'll get better at closing the sale. You'll get better at earning a living. Practice is just as valuable as a sale. Because here's what's valuable in sales: the skills. The sale will make you a living. The skills will make you a fortune. So, practice your presentation and your ability to communicate what you know. The people out there who say, "No, I wouldn't care for any," are just as valuable. Why? Because they took the time to let you practice your presentation. And especially when you're just getting started, you might want to pay them to listen to you practice while you stumble around. So, be thankful for the no's. Practice helps you develop skills. Skills make labor more valuable. If you just sell, you can make a living. If you skillfully sell, you can make a fortune. If you just talk, you can hold a family together. If you skillfully talk, you can build dreams and the future. The difference is skill. You can cut a tree down with a hammer, but it takes about 30 days. If you trade the hammer for an axe, you can cut the tree down in about 30 minutes. The difference between the 30 minutes and 30 days is the tool. And your best communication tool is your skill. So practice to get the skill of saying it well. Part of saying it well is sincerity. The next part is repetition. Now here's another part of saying it well. Brevity. Sometimes you don't need too much, just enough. The more you know, here's what I found out. The more you know, the briefer you can be. Because you can learn to make words more effective. Jesus was brief when he was putting his team together. He just wandered around the countryside, and every once in a while he'd see somebody he wanted on his team and said, "You follow me." Now that's short. That's brief. Now why could Jesus be so brief and yet be so effective? Here's what I think. For all that he was that he didn't have to say. For all that he was that he didn't have to say. When you become bigger, when you become wiser, when you become stronger, you become a person of better reputation, so that when you arrive, maybe your reputation has preceded you. And when you get there, you don't have to say much. You don't have to launch into a 2-hour harangue if your reputation has preceded you. Your reputation will get a lot of the job done for you before you ever arrive. Next is style. Part of saying it well is style. Be a student of style, a variety of styles. Then make sure you develop your own. Be a student, but develop your own. Don't be someone else. Let someone else influence you, but don't become them. Develop your own style. Here's another tip on saying it well, vocabulary. You've just got to have a good vocabulary to say it well. Vocabulary. We can only translate for other people with the tools called vocabulary. If you're lacking in vocabulary, then you're lacking in tools to describe some problem or some answer. Words, vocabulary. You can't communicate without them. And you can't communicate well without a defined vocabulary. Every time you come across a word that's new to you, what should you do? Look it up. Every time you're in a conversation and the other person uses a word that's new to you, look it up. Now, most of the time you can figure out the meaning of a new word by how it's used. But if you can't, make sure you hold your response until you know for sure. Several years ago, some of my friends took a survey among prisoners, some rehabilitation program they were working on, and they weren't looking for this, but here's what they found. There's definitely a relationship between vocabulary and behavior. Interesting. This is what they found. The more limited the vocabulary, the more the tendency to poor behavior. Wow. When you stop to think about it for a moment, it makes sense. Vocabulary is a way of seeing. It gives us insight, and only with your present vocabulary can you see. You can't use tools you don't have to see, to create light, understanding, awareness, comprehension, perception, vision. You can only have as much vision as your present vocabulary will give you. And if you're limited in vocabulary, then you can't see very well. What if a person could only see the world through a little tiny hole? Can you imagine the mistakes he'd make in judgment? He'd say, "Here's how it is." You'd say, "No, that's not how it is. Here's how it is." The guy says, "But I can't see it." How come he can't see it? He doesn't have the vocabulary to understand the translation. Now, vocabulary is also what we use as a tool to express what's going on in our heart, what's going on in our head. Translate our questions, translate our answers, our perceptions, what we see, to be able to say it. And I'm telling you, if you have a limited way of translating and expressing what's going on in your heart and what's going on in your head, you'll fall way behind. So you'd have twin problems without a good vocabulary. Number one, you wouldn't be able to see. Number two, you wouldn't be able to express. And your world would keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller, not having the vision, not having the tools. Finally, you wouldn't need a place much bigger than 10 by 12 to live. Why? That's about as big as some people's world is. That's all they've got, this little narrow world. Making mistakes every day. Why? They can't see. Getting it wrong every day. They can't comprehend. They can't understand. No tools with which to translate. For good communication, number one is having something good to say. Number two is saying it well. And number three is reading your audience. You've got to read what's going on between you and the people you're talking to. Should you say what you're saying a little softer? Should you say it a little stronger? Should you explain it more? Should you be more clear and concise? Should you quit? A lot of the decision-making that's going on during a conversation with someone depends on how well you can read, how well you can tell what's going on in the minds of those you're trying to reach. Doesn't matter if you're looking into the face of a child or the face of a colleague or 1,000 faces in an audience. You've got to read what's going on. You've got to pay attention. So let me give you some ways to read. The first one is you've got to read what you see. You've got to read what you see. Search the face of a child and see if you're coming across. See if they look perplexed. See if they're getting it. See if they can't get it. Body language tells us a lot. Look at how the people you're talking to are sitting, what they are doing with their hands, their eyes. A guy's got his arms crossed, legs crossed, chin tucked down and frowning. You've got your work cut out for you. This guy's not going to be easy to reach. The lady's standing up from behind her desk. You've got to hurry. She's not going to listen to much more. You've probably got to pick up the pace and get down to it. So the first one is read what you see. Here's the second one. Read what you hear. You've got to be a good listener to be a good communicator. Get some feedback. Listen. To be a good parent, you've got to be a good listener. To talk well, you've got to listen well. That's so valuable. Get the feedback. Now, what you hear may help you change gears. Be a little stronger. Be a little softer. Find a different illustration. This one isn't working. Search for another way to say it. Become sensitive to someone else's words, not just by preparing to talk when the other person's through. Listen. Pick up those signals that the feedback of words gives us. Now, here's the third way to read your audience, and that is to read how you feel. Emotional signals. You've got to learn to pick those up. Pick up those feelings. Women just seem to have this part built in. Men can learn it, but women have it.